Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Before we get into today's video, I wanted to tell you about today's sponsor, Factor. Factor is a meal service that takes the hassle out of meal prep and planning. Factor's no-hassle prepared meals are designed by dietitians for maximum nutrition and flavor. Unlike other meal services, Factor cooks your meals ahead of time so it arrives ready to heat and eat within minutes. This helps you avoid all of the prep work and cleanup that comes with traditional cooking. But this isn't just some fast food or TV dinner style service. These meals offer fresh, never frozen ingredients across a variety of preferences. They offer traditional meals as well as keto, calorie smart, vegetarian, and vegan. There are over 25 meal options each week, so you'll never get tired of the meals delivered to your door. Personally, the best thing that Factor offers to me is convenient nutrition. Nowadays, the only quick options are fast food or over-processed frozen dinners. Factor's meals ensure you always have something nutritious on hand. It saves time for prep, cooking, and cleanup. It gives you the time back to focus on the things that you actually love to do. Recently, my wife and I fostered a litter of newborn kittens. They had to be bottle fed every 4 hours, so we hardly got any sleep. Factor was there for nutritious meals while giving us the extra time to focus on the litter. Give Factor a try today. Use my link or go to go.factor75.com and use the code POGPowerMTG130 for $130 off across 6 boxes. Thanks to Factor for sponsoring today's video. When you give them a try, you help support us to continue offering you all great content, like tonight's game. So thanks! We play at many conventions throughout the year to get a chance to play with you all on camera. For this game, we went to Command Fest Richmond. We had a great time and played some awesome games. Stay tuned to our social media to find out the next convention we will attend. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Brandon, piloting the partner pair of Pure Imaginative Rascal and Toothy Imaginary Friend. This is a control deck that is focused on powering out Isochron Scepter or Palinchron and going for a combo win. Brandon's opening hand contains the Hardened Scales, Mental Misstep, Hinterland Harbor, Otawara Soaring City, Waterlogged Grove, and his London Mulligans are a High Market and a Manamo School at Water's Edge. Next, we have Spencer, piloting the partner pair of Jeska, Thrice Reborn, and Ishai, Ujitai Dragon Speaker. This deck's goal is to beat face with a very large bird. In all seriousness, this deck seeks to power out its commanders and pressure life totals by swinging for massive damage. It also falls back on a Dockside and Baron Master Wizard combo. Spencer's opening hand contains a Jeweled Lotus, Pyroblast, Tundra, Island, Muddle the Mixture, Angel's Grace, and a Ponder. After that, we have Mark, piloting the partner pair of Rograk, Son of Roga, and Silas Wren, Seeker Adept. This deck seeks to grind value with its commander Silas and pressure his opponent's life totals. It has classic Grixis win cons, but prefers to hit face. Mark's opening hand contains the Steam Vents, Paradise Mantle, Springleaf Drum, Simian Spirit Guide, Arcane Signet, Arid Mesa, and a Wheel of Misfortune. Finally, we have Cal, piloting the partner pair of Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator and Tana the Bloodsower. This is Cal's signature deck, Teamer Pirates. It aims to rush out a Glenhorn Buccaneer and go for a combo win in conjunction with its commander Malcolm. Cal's opening hand contains a Tinderwall, Windswept Heath, Mana Drain, Cyclonic Rift, Gemstone Caverns, and his London Mulligans are a Wooded Foothills and an Autumn's Veil. Without further ado, let's begin this abiding able-bodied abnormally abrupt affirmations. Brandon wins the Underwater Basket Weaving Challenge and gets to start us off. But Cal has a pre-game action and puts Gemstone Caverns onto the battlefield, exiling Tinderwall. Brandon draws a card for turn and plays a Waterlogged Grove. He taps it to help cast a Hardened Scales. He passes. Spencer draws a card for turn and plays a Tundra. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. He cracks it to help cast his commander, Ishai, Ujitai Dragon Speaker. Set up with the turn 1 bird players dream of, Spencer passes. Mark draws and plays a Steam Vents and to play untapped, paying 2 life. He apologizes to the table for what he's about to do, and everyone scratches their heads. He casts Paradise Mantle. Ishai triggers and gets a +1/+1 counter. He casts his commander, Rograk, Son of Roga. Ishai triggers and gets a 1/1 counter. He casts Springleaf Drum. Ishai triggers and gets a 1/1 counter. He taps his Rograk to help activate Springleaf Drum. He exiles Simian Spirit Guide from his hand to help cast Arcane Signet. Ishai triggers and gets a counter. The table begs him to stop, and he decides he's done enough. He equips Paradise Mantle to Rograk. He ships the turn to Cal. Cal draws and plays a Windswept Heath. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a tropical island onto the battlefield. Staring down a massive bird already, Cal holds up mana and passes the turn. Brandon draws and plays a Cavern of Souls. It enters and he names Illusion. Taking a page from Cal's book and equally scared of Ishai, Brandon gives a turn to Spencer. Spencer draws and plays a Steam Vents into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts Ponder. He looks at the top 3, rearranges, and draws. He moves to combat and decides to thank Mark for his generosity by attacking Mark with Ishai. Mark takes it, and Spencer passes. Mark draws and plays an Arid Mesa. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a volcanic island onto the battlefield. He taps his commander with Paradise Mantle to help cast Wheel of Misfortune. Ishai triggers and gets a counter. Everyone secretly picks a number and then reveals them at the same time. Mark chooses 11, Cal chooses 8, Brandon chooses 5, and Spencer chooses 4. Everyone but Spencer wheels, and then Mark takes 11 damage. Mark passes the turn. Cal draws and plays a Rejuvenating Springs. He casts his commander, Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator. Ishai triggers and gets a counter. He passes. Brandon draws and casts a Jeweled Lotus. Ishai triggers and gets a counter. He cracks it and taps his Cavern of Souls to help cast an uncounterable, toothy, imaginary friend. Ishai triggers and gets a counter. All finished up, Brandon gives the turn over to Spencer. Spencer draws and plays a Polluted Delta. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Hallowed Fountain onto the battlefield untapped, paying 2 life. He casts Ranger Captain of Eos. It enters, and he fetches up an Esper Sentinel into his hand. He moves to combat and attacks Mark with Ishai. Mark declares no blocks and takes it all. With Mark's life total in the ropes already, Spencer passes the turn. Mark draws and plays an Underground River. He casts Necropotence. He pays 7 life through Necropotence, exiling 7 cards. He moves to his end step and puts the exiled cards into his hand. He passes, discarding to hand size, exiling the discarded cards. Cal draws and casts Professional Facebreaker. He moves to combat and attacks Brandon with Malcolm. Brandon takes it and Malcolm and Facebreaker trigger. Cal creates 2 treasures and then passes the turn. Brandon draws and Toothy triggers, getting 2 +1/+1 counters through Hardened Scales. He taps his Waterlogged Grove to help cast Sylvan Library. Ishai triggers and gets a counter. He ships the turn. Spencer draws and plays an Islet. He casts Esper Sentinel. He moves to combat and attacks Mark with Ranger Captain of Eos and Brandon with Ishai. Both take it, and in his second main phase, Spencer casts Talisman of Creativity. He passes. Mark skips his draw step due to Necropotence. In his main phase, he casts Dockside Extortionist. Ishai triggers and gets a counter. Dockside enters, and he creates 6 treasures. He casts Rhystic Study. Ishai and Esper Sentinel trigger. Spencer draws, and Ishai grows. Mark casts Void Snare, targeting Ishai. Ishai triggers and gets a counter. In response to Void Snare, Spencer casts Pyroblast, targeting Void Snare. Rhystic triggers and Mark draws. In response, Mark casts Spell Pierce, targeting Pyroblast. Ishai triggers and gets a counter. In response, Spencer casts Brainstorm. Rhystic triggers and Mark draws. Brainstorm resolves, and Spencer draws 3 and then puts 2 back on top. Unfortunately, Spencer could not find an answer, and Spell Pierce resolves, countering Pyroblast. Then Void Snare resolves, bouncing Ishai. Mark casts Brain Freeze, with all copies targeting himself. He casts Demonic Consultation. In response, Spencer sacrifices his Ranger Captain of Eos, stopping his opponents from casting non-creature spells for the rest of the turn. Consultation resolves, and he names Deadly Rollick. He exiles until he finds Deadly Rollick, including his Thassa's Oracle and Peer into the Abyss. He puts Deadly Rollick into his hand and passes the turn. Cal draws and casts Chrome Mox, imprinting Gamble. Esper Sentinel and Rhystic trigger. Cal pays for Esper and Mark draws. Cal casts Eldritch Evolution, sacrificing Professional Facebreaker. Rhystic triggers and Mark draws. In response, Mark casts Deadly Rollick for its alternate cost, targeting Malcolm. Esper Sentinel triggers and Spencer draws. In response, Cal casts Dispel, targeting Deadly Rollick, countering it. Then Eldritch Evolution fetches up a Glenhorn Buccaneer onto the battlefield. Cal moves to combat and swings Glenhorn at Mark and Malcolm at Spencer. Mark blocks Glenhorn with Rogue Rack and Spencer takes it. Malcolm triggers and creates a treasure. Still in combat, he activates Glenhorn Buccaneer. Cal presents a loop of activating Glenhorn, looting, damaging his opponents, and creating treasures through Malcolm. Cal repeats this process until Brandon and Mark are dead. Unfortunately, because Brandon and Mark's low life totals, Cal cannot create enough treasures to also kill Spencer. All said and done, Spencer takes 24 damage and Cal loots 24 times. On its final iteration, Cal is left with 2 treasures. In his second main phase, Cal plays a command tower. He casts Spellseeker. It enters and he fetches up a Twin Flame into his hand. He passes. Spencer draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Plateau onto the battlefield. He also casts Spellseeker. It enters and he fetches up a Swords to Plowshares into his hand. Spencer gives the turn to Cal. Cal draws and immediately moves to combat. He attacks Spencer with Malcolm, Glenhorn, and Spellseeker. In response, Spencer casts Swords to Plowshares, targeting Glenhorn. In response, Cal activates Glenhorn, looting, dealing 1 damage to Spencer, and creating a treasure through Malcolm. He activates Glenhorn again, repeating the process. He activates it 1 more time, looking for an answer. Unfortunately, he cannot find an answer, and Swords to Plowshares resolves, exiling Glenhorn, with Cal gaining 2 life. Spencer then blocks Spellseeker with his own Spellseeker and takes the rest. Malcolm triggers and Cal creates a treasure. Cal passes. At the end of Cal's turn, Spencer casts Enlightened Tutor. He fetches up a Lion's Eye Diamond onto the top of his library. The turn moves to Spencer. Spencer draws and casts Lion's Eye Diamond. He transmutes Muddle the Mixture, fetching up an Underworld Breach into his hand. He casts Underworld Breach. He cracks his LED, adding 3 blue and discarding his hand, including his commander Ishai. He moves Ishai to the command zone. He escapes Spellseeker. In response, Cal casts Red Elemental Blast, targeting Spellseeker, paying for Esper Sentinel. Spellseeker is countered, and Spencer follows it up by escaping LED. He cracks it, adding 3 blue. He escapes Spellseeker again. It enters, and he fetches up a Brain Freeze into his hand. He escapes LED and cracks it, adding 3 blue and discarding Brain Freeze. Unfortunately, he realizes he doesn't have enough cards in his graveyard to escape Brain Freeze. With no cards in his hand and no way to fill his graveyard, Spencer puts Sadness onto the stack, and it resolves. Spencer passes the turn, seeing his fate. Cal untaps and immediately moves to combat. He attacks Spencer with Malcolm. Spencer takes it, and Cal wins the game. What an amazing game. Since that one was so quick, we got another game ready, so let's dive in. In this game, we have Isaac piloting Una, Queen of the Fae. This deck seeks to control the board, disrupt opponents, then wins by milling everyone out. Isaac's opening hand contains a Mishra's Workshop, Rhystic Study, Gilded Lotus, Mox Opal, Grim Monolith, Mana Crypt, and a Sol Ring. Next, we have Austin piloting the partner pair of Ikra Shadiki the Usurper and Crom Ludovic's Opus. This deck seeks to get Boseiju, who shelters all, onto the battlefield and casts an uncounterable ad nauseum. Austin's opening hand contains a Command Tower, Windswept Teeth, Misty Rainforest, Crop Rotation, Brain Freeze, Jataxian Probe, and a Mox Diamond. After that, we have Cal piloting the partner pair of Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator and Tana the Bloodsower. Cal's opening hand contains a Fierce Guardianship, Red Elemental Blast, Mana Crypt, Spire of Industry, Mystic Remora, Volcanic Island, and a Professional Facebreaker. Finally, we have Chris piloting Grenzo, Dungeon Warden. This deck seeks to generate a lot of mana and attempt to turn its entire deck upside down. Chris's opening hand contains a Marsh Flats, Ironcrag Feet, Simian Spirit Guide, Mana Crypt, Gemstone Caverns, Jessica's Will, and a Mox Opal. And Isaac gets to start us off. But Chris has a pre-game action and puts Gemstone Caverns onto the battlefield, exiling Simian Spirit Guide. Isaac draws a card for turn and plays a Mishra's Workshop. He casts a Mana Crypt. He casts a Gilded Lotus. He casts Rhystic Study. The rest of the table stares at Isaac in disbelief, and Isaac passes the turn. Austin draws a card for turn and plays a Windswept Teeth. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Bayou onto the battlefield. He casts a Mox Diamond, discarding Flooded Strand. Rhystic triggers, and Isaac draws. He pays 2 life to cast Jataxian Probe, targeting Cal. Rhystic triggers, and Austin pays. He looks at Cal's hand and draws a card. Austin passes the turn. Cal draws and plays a Volcanic Island. He casts a Mana Crypt. Rhystic triggers, and Isaac draws. He casts a Dockside Extortionist, paying the Rhystic tax. It enters, and Cal creates 4 treasures. He casts his commander, Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator, paying the Rhystic tax. All through, Cal passes. Chris draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. He casts a Mana Crypt. Rhystic triggers, and Isaac draws. He casts his commander, Grenzo, Dungeon Warden, where X equals 0, paying for Rhystic. He casts Mox Opal, paying for Rhystic again. Finished up, Chris passes. During his upkeep, Isaac loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Morphic Pool. He casts a Grim Monolith. He casts a Sol Ring. He casts his commander, Una, Queen of the Fae. He casts Mox Opal. Isaac ends his turn. At the end of Isaac's turn, Austin casts Brainstorm. Rhystic triggers, and Isaac draws. Then Austin draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. The turn moves to Austin. Austin draws and plays a Command Tower. He casts a Jeweled Lotus, paying for Rhystic. He cracks his Lotus to help cast his commander, Crom Ludovic's Opus. Rhystic triggers, and Isaac draws. Finished up, Austin passes. During his upkeep, Cal loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Spire of Industry. He casts Professional Facebreaker, paying the Rhystic tax. He moves to combat and attacks Chris with Malcolm. Chris takes it, Malcolm and Facebreaker trigger, and Cal creates 2 treasures. In his second main phase, Cal casts a Mystic Remora, paying the Rhystic tax. Crom triggers, and Austin draws. Cal ends his turn. During his upkeep, Chris wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays a High Market. He activates Grenzo, putting Strip Mine from the bottom of his library into his graveyard. He casts Dragon's Rage Channeler. Rhystic triggers, and Isaac draws. He activates Grenzo, putting Sulphurous Springs from the bottom of his library into his graveyard. Chris ships the turn to Isaac. At the end of Chris's turn, Isaac activates Una for 3, naming red, targeting Cal. Cal exiles Gamble, Jessica's Will, and Mistcast, and Isaac creates 2 fairies. The turn moves to Isaac. During his upkeep, Isaac wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays a Swamp. He casts Basalt Monolith. He casts Bolus's Citadel. Remora triggers, and Cal draws. Crom triggers, and Austin draws. Citadel resolves, and Isaac looks at the top card. He does nothing else, surprisingly, and passes the turn. Austin draws and plays a Misty Rainforest. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a tropical island onto the battlefield. Austin passes. During his upkeep, Cal loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. Also in his upkeep, he pays for his Remora. He draws and plays a Training Center. He moves to combat and attacks Chris with Malcolm and Austin with Facebreaker. Both take it, Malcolm and Facebreaker trigger, and Cal creates 3 treasures. In his second main phase, Cal casts Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer, paying for Rhystic. All through, Cal ends his turn. During his upkeep, Chris loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and casts Jeska's Will, targeting Austin, paying for Rhystic. Remora triggers and Cal draws. In response, Austin casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing his Bayou, paying for Rhystic. Remora triggers and Cal draws again. Crop Rotation resolves and Austin fetches up a Boseiju who shelters all onto the battlefield tapped. Then Jeska's Will resolves, Chris adds 5 red, and then exiles Bloodstained Mire, Vampiric Tutor, and Priest of Gix off of the top of his library. He plays a Bloodstained Mire from exile. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Blood Crypt onto the battlefield untapped, paying 2 life. He casts Priest of Gix from exile, paying for Rhystic. Crom triggers and Austin draws. Priest enters and Chris adds 3 black. He casts Vampiric Tutor from exile. Remora triggers and Cal draws. Dragon's Rage Channeler triggers and Chris surveils, putting Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, into his graveyard. Then Vampiric Tutor resolves and he fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. Next, Chris casts Ironcrag Feet, paying for Rhystic. Remora triggers and Cal draws. In response, Isaac activates Una for 2, naming black, targeting Chris. Chris sighs because he just tutored, and he exiles Deflecting Swat and Praetor's Grasp, and Isaac creates a fairy. With Ironcrag Feet on the stack, Cal casts Swan Song. Rhystic triggers and Isaac draws. Ironcrag is countered and Chris creates a 2/2 bird. Finished up, Chris passes. At the end of Chris's turn, Isaac activates Una for 3, naming black, targeting Austin. Austin exiles Mystic Remora, Bloodstained Mire, and Otawara, Soaring City. Austin cries at his lost Remora, and the turn moves to Isaac. During his upkeep, Isaac wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays an Academy Ruins. He pays 2 life to cast Power Artifact from the top of his library through Bolas' Citadel, targeting his Grim Monolith. Remora triggers and Cal draws. In response, Cal casts Fierce Guardianship for its alternate cost, paying the Rhystic tax. In response, Isaac casts Swan Song. Remora and Crom trigger, and Cal and Austin draw. In response, Austin casts Pyroblast, targeting Power Artifact. Mystic and Rhystic triggers, and Cal and Isaac draw. With nothing else, Pyroblast counters Power Artifact, Swan Song counters Fierce, and Cal creates 2/2 bird. Plans thwarted, Isaac passes. Austin draws and plays a Taiga. He casts an Ignoble Hierarch. Rhystic triggers, and Isaac draws. He taps his Boseiju to help cast his own Rhystic Study. Mystic and Rhystic trigger, and Cal and Isaac draw. In response, Cal casts Red Elemental Blast. Rhystic triggers, and Isaac draws again. Red Blast counters Rhystic, and Austin ships his turn. During his upkeep, Cal lets his Remora die. Also in his upkeep, he loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He casts a Soul Ring, paying the Rhystic tax. He casts a Chrome Mox, paying the tax again. Crom triggers, and Austin draws. Chrome Mox resolves, and Cal imprints Elvish Mystic. With nothing else, Cal passes. During his upkeep, Chris wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and activates Grenzo, putting Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker into his graveyard, then puts it onto the battlefield. He activates Kiki-Jiki, targeting his Priest of Gix. In response, Isaac flashes in an Opposition Agent. In response, Cal casts Mystical Tutor, paying the Rhystic tax. It resolves, and he fetches up a Finale of Devastation onto the top of his library. Then Op Agent resolves, then Kiki's ability resolves, and Chris creates a copy of Priest of Gix. Gix enters, and Chris adds 3 black. He activates Grenzo, putting Ancient Tomb from the bottom of his library into his graveyard. He activates Grenzo, putting Mountain from the bottom into his graveyard. He activates Grenzo again, putting Tainted Pact from the bottom into his graveyard. He attacks Isaac with his token Priest of Gix. Isaac blocks with Una. Finished up, and not getting the results he wanted, Chris passes the turn. At the end of Chris's turn, Isaac activates Una, naming green, targeting Cal. Cal sighs, because he just tutored, and Cal exiles Finale of Devastation, Survival of the Fittest, and Breeding Pool. Then Isaac creates 2 fairies. Cal tells the table to stop tutoring into Una, and the turn moves to Isaac. During his upkeep, Isaac loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and pays 2 life to cast Copy Artifact off of the top of his library through Citadel. It enters as a copy of Gilded Lotus. He pays 2 life to cast Painter's Servant off of the top through Citadel. It enters, and Isaac names blue. He casts Transmute Artifact. In response, Austin casts Veil of Summer to dig for an answer. In response, Isaac pays 2 life to cast Counterspell off of the top through Citadel. Veil is countered, and Transmute Artifact resolves. Isaac sacrifices Grim Monolith and fetches up Rings of Brighthearth onto the battlefield, paying the difference. He taps his Basalt Monolith for 3 colorless. He pays 3 to activate the untap ability of Basalt. He pays 2 to activate Rings of Brighthearth, copying the ability. The ability resolves, Basalt untaps, and before the second ability resolves, Isaac taps Basalt for 3 colorless and activates Rings of Brighthearth for 2, copying the ability again. He presents a loop of copying Basalt's ability over and over, netting more and more mana each time. He taps his Gilded Lotus and adds 3 blue. He activates Una's ability, naming blue, targeting each opponent. He exiles each opponent's library and creates a massive amount of fairies. He passes the turn. One by one, each opponent attempts to draw from an empty library, loses, and Isaac wins the game. We have time for one more, so let's dive in. First, we have Mike piloting Najeela, the Blade Blossom. Mike's opening hand contains Abrupt Decay, Tropical Island, Grim Hireling, Dockside Extortionist, Birds of Paradise, and his London Mulligans are a Cyclonic Rift and a Summoner's Pact. Next, we have Andy piloting the partner pair of Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator and Vial Smasher the Fierce. His opening hand contains a Force of Negation, an Offer You Can't Refuse, Spectral Sailor, Ancient Tomb, Mox Opal, Mystic Remora, and a Chrome Mox. After that, we have Lincoln piloting Lazav the Multifarious. His opening hand contains a Mana Crypt, Tainted Isle, City of Brass, Ghostly Pilferer, Pact of Negation, Swamp, and a Dimir Signet. Finally, we have Bailey piloting the partner pair of Thrasios Triton Hero and Bruce Tarl, Boorish Herder. His opening hand contains a Verdant Catacombs, Mana Confluence, Gaia's Cradle, Gilded Drake, Deflecting Swat, and his London Mulligans are a Temple Garden and a Captain Sisay. And Mike gets to start us off. Mike draws and plays a Tropical Island. He casts Birds of Paradise and passes the turn. Andy draws and casts Chrome Mox, imprinting Spectral Sailor. He casts Mystic Remora. He plays an Ancient Tomb for turn. He casts a Mox Opal. Andy ends his turn. Lincoln draws and plays a City of Brass. He casts a Mana Crypt. Remora triggers and Andy draws. Lincoln casts a Dimir Signet and Andy draws through Remora again. He taps the City of Brass to help cast Ghostly Pilferer. Lincoln gives the turn to Bailey. Bailey draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tropical Island onto the battlefield. Bailey passes. Mike draws and plays a Plateau. He casts Dockside Extortionist. It enters and Mike creates 5 treasures. Mike follows it up with a turn 2 ad nauseum. The table is stunned and Andy responds by casting Force of Negation, exiling a blue card. Ad Naus is countered and exiled. Mike sighs and passes the turn. During his upkeep, Andy pays for his Remora. He draws and plays a Wooded Foothills. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Volcanic Island onto the battlefield. He taps his Ancient Tomb to help cast his commander, Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator. Lincoln's Ghostly Pilferer triggers and he draws. Malcolm resolves and Andy gives the turn to Lincoln. During his upkeep, Lincoln loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Swamp. He moves to combat and attacks Bailey with Ghostly Pilferer. Bailey takes it and Lincoln passes the turn. Bailey draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He taps his Confluence to help cast Gilded Drake. It enters and he exchanges control of Andy's Malcolm. Finished up, Bailey passes. Mike draws and casts Grim Hireling. He moves to combat and attacks Lincoln with Dockside. Lincoln takes it, Hireling triggers, and Mike creates 2 treasures. Mike ends his turn. During his upkeep, Andy lets his Remora die. He draws and plays a Luxury Suite. He taps his Ancient Tomb to help cast his own Dockside Extortionist. In response, Lincoln taps his City of Brass to help cast Mystical Tutor. He fetches up a Demonic Consultation onto the top of his library. Then Dockside enters and Andy creates 4 treasures. He casts his commander, Vial Smasher the Fierce. Pilferer triggers and Lincoln draws. Vial Smasher resolves and Andy ships the turn to Lincoln. During his upkeep, Lincoln wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays a Tainted Isle. He taps the City of Brass to help cast Thassa's Oracle. It enters, and with the trigger on the stack, he casts Demonic Consultation. In response, Andy casts an Offer You Can't Refuse. Vial Smasher triggers and deals 1 to Bailey. In response, Lincoln casts Pact of Negation, targeting Offer. In response, Bailey casts Deflecting Swat for its alternate cost, targeting Pact. In response, Lincoln casts Swan Song, targeting Swat. With nothing else, Swan Song counters Swat, Bailey creates a 2/2 bird, Pact of Negation counters Offer, and Demonic Consultation resolves. Lincoln names You Are Already Dead and exiles his library. Thassa's Oracle's trigger resolves, and Lincoln wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a wild set of games tonight. Congrats to Cal, Isaac, and Lincoln on their wins. In Game 1, Cal started off slow but quickly rushed ahead using his Commander Malcolm's powerful treasure creation ability. This is a classic case of being the second scariest person at the table until it's too late. Cal played his hand well and waited until the perfect moment to strike, clinching the win. In Game 2, Isaac had an absolutely explosive start and it was too much for the table to keep up. He was able to execute his game plan while controlling the board at the same time. His turn 1 Rhystic Study is what really gave him the fuel he needed to keep going. In Game 3, Lincoln was able to sneak under the radar and pull out a win. The Thoracle combo is so compact and easy to pull off, and people frequently forget to expect it in the early game. They usually think things like tons of tutors and value engines have to hit before this combo is attempted. However, Lincoln stayed patient, let the table do their own squabbling with each other, and seized his victory on turn 3. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more like this, be sure to subscribe. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.